Local programming on KRWG made possible in part by viewers like you. Thank you.
Welcome to Fronteras, A Changing America. I'm Edmundo Resendez. Religious pilgrimages and lowriders are two cultural aspects of the Mexican-American culture captured in a new book by New Mexico State University Spanish professor Spencer Herrera, New Mexico Centennial poet laureate Levi Romero, and photojournalist Robert Kaiser. Sagrado, a Photopoetics across the Chicano Homeland, is a collection of personal essays, poems, and photographs inspired by the building of the fence along the U.S.-Mexico border. The book is published by University of New Mexico Press. It gives an intimate look at Chicano cultural practices and beliefs using 117 color photographs, dozens of personal narratives, and poems. Our guest today is Professor Herrera. Professor Herrera, welcome to Fronteras, A Changing America.
Thank you.
As we get started, it seems like such a wonderful topic to put a book together on. What brought on this collaboration between you and the other contributors?
Well, when I moved to Las Cruces almost 8 years ago, one day I went downtown. I went to the farmer's market. I didn't know it existed, and I ran across this booth with some beautiful images, beautiful photographs, and I started talking to the photographer, and I was really amazed at how beautiful these images were and how close he got to his subjects. And then when we started talking, he told me that he uses film exclusively, and that was even more striking because, as you know, with the digital age, you can take as many pictures as you want, but he was limited to whatever he had in the camera. And so we got to talking, and I asked him if he wanted to join me to document Chicano culture. And then we started one day looking for things, and our first sort of major exposition was a mountain. Kind of thinking what I wanted to do, but from there just going out and searching for it. One thing led to another, and before you know it, we were really onto something, and that's how it initially started. Meeting Robert, looking at his photographs, and just being amazed at how detailed they were and how beautiful his images were.
Now, the book is pretty diverse. You filled it up with poetry, personal essays, stories, and photographs. How difficult was it to create a balance with all the works?
There's a part that's not so difficult, and then there's the parts that are very challenging. The easy part, in a sense, was actually doing the work, going out and documenting culture. Halfway through the project, we invited Levi Romero, as you mentioned, the New Mexico Centennial Poet Laureate. So when Robert and Levi would go out, let's say to Arizona or to northern New Mexico or wherever it may have been, going to those places was the fun part. Documenting people, their culture, meeting people, learning about their lives. That was the fun part. Writing the essays is challenging, of course, but working together artistically, that was very enjoyable. But then when you get the essays and the photos and the poetry on paper, and you start looking at them, and you start to try to figure out how are you going to mesh these three together, and what's going to go on this page and what's going to go in this chapter. That's the challenging part, because you have three artists and you have three different perspectives. And so although I think we worked well together, I think that's where the challenges lied, were the heaviest, when we actually had to put the product together. The process was fun and exciting and easy, if you will. The product, putting that together, that was the difficult part.
About how many photographs did you have to work with?
I think maybe at the end of the day, we might have even used close to 100 rolls of film.
And again, for a lot of people that today don't understand, 100 rolls of film is about 24 pictures, pictures per roll. You know, when people are so used to digital, of being able to take a photograph, you guys were dealing with, you know, snapping the picture and, you know, seeing what came of it. And I've seen some of the pictures, and they're just beautiful.
Yeah, watching Robert work again is really amazing, because he really has to understand the subject. So you have to kind of go in thinking what you might see, and then actually see it, and then get to know the people instead of just snapping away. And then oftentimes what I really enjoyed about his work is he seldom would hold the camera up to his eye. Oftentimes he would hold it right here, right next to his heart or to the side. And so he's engaged with the people. He's looking at them eye to eye, and they're not looking at the camera. And then many times they didn't even know he took a picture. He's looking at them, talking with them. He presses the button. And then later on, we would talk and on our way home, and we would discuss what we saw. And he didn't know what exactly he had, because obviously you don't have the instant gratification of the screen. He has to wait till he develops a film. But sometimes he would say, you know, I think I got it. Other times he would say, well, if you hear someone scream in the middle of the night, then you know I didn't get it. But more times than not, I'd see the picture the next week, and it was an amazing picture. And you can tell that we all did, created a connection with that person. Not as a subject, but as a human being, and really got to understand who they were and their story.
The book is called Sagrado, Photopoetics across the Chicano Homeland. And you know, how do you define Chicano?
If I could define Sagrado real quick as well.
Yeah, Sagrado as well.
We were working with titles, and Levi changed that part a little bit, and he said we talked about the word Sagrado, which we define, Levi particularly, is when two or more gather in the name of community. And so we're really looking at when people come together to celebrate their community, to practice their cultural heritage, and to pass it on to the children. And so when people do those things, we found that as sort of sacred acts. And then the word Chicano, you know, that has a long history. Not everybody agrees on the history. Obviously, Mexican-American origin or Mexican origin, but saying Mexican-American is not quite Chicano. It's like saying Italian-American or Irish-American. But a person of Mexican origin who is undergoing sort of a development of their own consciousness, if you will, conscious raising of who they are, politically, culturally, historically, and linguistically. So this is a person who maybe as a child, much like myself and maybe yourself growing up in Houston, that we didn't understand who Mexican Americans were. We didn't know our history. We weren't into history books. I certainly didn't really speak my language, Spanish language, but I understood. I had words here and there. And so really it's a process of trying to uncover that information and recover it and make it your own. And so that recovering your identity essentially. And then also celebrating your indigenous roots. All those things come together, and a person decides that they want to claim the identity of being a Chicano.
You know, growing up, as you mentioned, in Houston, and just growing up in the 80s, and you know, I remember when I thought of Chicano, I would think of Chico and the Man, you know, and I also thought of Cheech Marin. And, you know, what are some stereotypes that people may have of Chicanos, you know, when they think of Chicanos, both on a positive and perhaps even on a negative level? What are some stereotypes?
I think that some folks don't quite know what it is. It's maybe even a generation or two ago. They see it as a dirty word, person who's uneducated. And so really, you know, within the field of Chicano studies, Chicano literature, Chicano film, our job is to teach our students, no matter what the field is, but to encourage them to keep learning and to show them what Chicano is through the culture, through the literature, through our literary and cultural production. And so some people see it as a dirty word, and so the students want to find out what it is. They're curious. And the classes generally fill up really, really well, because most of our students in Spanish, here we have lots of Hispanic students and a lot of Spanish-speaking students, and they want to learn who they are. And so they're really quenching that knowledge. And so the positive side is they go, oh, that's pretty good. That's actually pretty cool. And I didn't know about the Bracero program, but I heard my grandfather tell me that he came over here through some program. Or I never read these works by Sandra Cisneros or Liva Romero or Ana Castillo or Denise Chavez or Rodolfo Naya, but I've heard their names. And so now they have opportunity to really read their history and their stories. And so the positive parts are many. They come away, I think, with a stronger sense of self, and they're more secure in who they are. And then also think they begin to share those stories with their families, right? And go back and maybe ask their grandparents, their grandfather, hey, tell me about the Bracero program. And then that history starts coming out. And I think that that's really enriching and powerful at the same time.
Where's the Chicano culture compared to today? You know, from, again, growing up myself in the 70s and 80s, you know, again, the roles, the television roles that I saw, again, of Chico and the Man, Cheech Marin, you know, how does it compare to today? You know, the Chicano culture of the 70s and the 80s, where you know, again, when I think of Chicano, I think of, you know, pride in the culture of where you come from. And, you know, how does it compare to today?
I think, I think you're absolutely right. When we think of Chicano, we often think of the 60s and the 70s, and then the 80s was termed the decade of the Hispanic. And so today I think that's one of our biggest questions we have for our students is, what are you guys doing today compared to what our parents and grandparents did in the 60s and 70s? How are you involved in your community? So there's that issue. And I think that oftentimes we don't see it, but it doesn't mean they're not active. I think there's a lot more organizations today, and so they're involved in community organizations. Obviously, with the age of the internet, they're online, they're writing blogs, they're tweeting, and so those things are well, but we don't see maybe, and there are demonstrations for sure, especially when it comes to Arizona and the book banning and the libro traficante, but it seems that at some stage, it's not as powerful as it was in the 60s and 70s. But I don't know if that's the case or not. Maybe it's just our perception because we don't have the public viewing of it as we did back then. But as far as the cultural production or pop culture, I don't know if a whole lot has changed. We still don't see a lot of Mexican Americans on TV or film. And when we do, oftentimes it's still the stereotypical roles, the gang banger, the maid, the farm laborer. And those people exist, of course, and they should be represented. But we also have people in the business world and all kinds of sectors.
One of the things I hear when I discuss, you know, Latinos, Chicanos on television is like, well, you have your own network. You have your own networks, you know, where that culture is shown. But again, you know, looking at the Chicano culture of English-speaking, you know, second, third generation Mexicanos, Latinos, Hispanos, however you know we want to put it. I mean, there seems to be a lack of representation on some of the major television networks.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, you said you watched Chico and the Man. I mean, maybe for us, the closest thing to Chicano culture, in a sense, as strange as it might sound, may have been something like that. It was Puerto Rican, or even some extent, oddly, we grew up watching things like Hee Haw because of the rural aspect of the shows, and we kind of we associated with that. But where are the shows today? I mean, I think little by little we're starting to see maybe a character within a show, which I think is good because you want the shows not to be maybe necessarily just about Chicanos, but you want it to look like society looks, where we all live together and we do things together, we work together, and so you do want those characters. But I don't think we've made a lot of headway in that area yet. But I think we're slowly getting there.
With regards to the book, you have a poet laureate, and I'd like to discuss the poem, one of the poems that we've selected here, and it's called Pancho Villa's Prayers. And could you perhaps tell us a little bit about this read from your essay on Pancho Villa's prayer?
Sure. I think that the essay will tell the story, but it's one of our trips we took to Tucson, amongst many of the places, and it's the epilogue of the book. So it's sort of the last chapter, and I think there's so many different essays and many stories and many images, so it doesn't give anything away, but it kind of describes the book in a sense of this search for culture. This elusive idea of culture. What is culture? And I think what we found was that the culture is there. You just have to look for it sometimes. It hasn't disappeared. It's been there. And so for each chapter, I begin with an epigraph, something that someone said or we heard in our conversation, and I use it to tie in the idea. It's not directly related, but this epigraph is from Bella Moreno, and it's si es tuyo, aunque te quites, y si no, aunque te pongas, which roughly means if it's yours, even if you take yourself away or remove yourself, and if it's not, even if you apply yourself. It was still dark outside when I went to kiss my wife goodbye. Half asleep, she turned to me before I left the room and whispered, "I hope you find what you're looking for." 5 years into this project, and that was the first time she had said that. What did she think I was looking for, I wondered. I wasn't quite sure myself. Somehow, I knew it had to do with this elusive notion of culture and identity. In 2010, we visited the historic mission San Javier del Bac in Tucson. Founded by Padre Eusebio Kino in 1692, the mission was built by a large workforce of Tohono O'odham between 1783 and 1797. It is a beautiful white stucco building known as the White Dove of the Desert. You can see it from miles away. The mission lies in the heart of the Native American Southwest. Tohono O'odham, Apache, and Pascua Yaqui have lived in the Sonoran Desert for centuries. Next to the mission sits Grotto Hill with a large cross at the top. A circular path surrounds the hill where people pray and light candles. As I walked around Grotto Hill, I noticed an Indian man standing alone along the exterior rock wall. Talking to himself in a low, hushed tone, he had an anxious look about him. I left and returned to the church. As the light of the day began to wane, I found Levi back at the grotto, talking with the same man. I was reminded of how good poets find poetry in unlikely places. As Levi would say, the last thing in poetry is the poem. The man introduced himself. "My name is Carlos Luis, but they call me Pancho Villa," and the title is In Search of Pancho Villa. In some ways, he represented the stereotypical image of the hard-luck Indian. He had recently been released from jail. Homeless, he spent the night in a nearby field, and he started the morning by drinking. But once I began to hear his story, my short-sighted impression of him changed. As it turned out, it was our good fortune to meet him, because he had some important things to share with us. Pancho Villa is a Pascua Yaqui. At a young age, he was given two options by a judge, who oversaw his case in the juvenile court system: go to jail or join the army. He figured, what's the difference? He would get killed in either place. But at least in the army, they'd give him a gun to defend himself. Pancho Villa became a member of the Screaming Eagles, the 101st Airborne Division. Years later, after leaving the army and after a stint in prison, he was broke, homeless, and alone. But he had two things going for him: a memory from his grandmother's home and his songs. Pancho Villa told us that when he was a child, the priest would come to their home and say things in the name of the church. Behind his grandmother's stove was a hole in the wall, where she would store precious belongings, hiding them from the priest and their unannounced raids. He remembered that his grandmother had kept a small muñeco of San Francisco de Asís behind the wall. He was released from prison just in time to retrieve the muñeco. The next day, the house was to be bulldozed so that his sister could put up a mobile home. When he went to the house and stuck his hand behind the wall, there was the muñeco, in mint condition in a small glass case, just as his grandmother had left it. The day we met Carlos, he had come to San Javier to see if the priest might want to buy it. The priest asked if he would instead donate it to the church. He left mad after he quickly realized that all the church ever did was exploit the Indians. He then carefully pulled the muñeco out of his bag so we could see it. It was a beautiful piece of art. His grandmother was wise to hide it. I commented on how fortunate he was to have found it. He firmly corrected me and said that he had not found anything. It was already there. The hole in the wall, the muñeco, his childhood home that had been razed, so many memories ran through his head. All he had left were the clothes on his back and this porcelain saint. With no place to call home, no one to help him, and a run of hard luck, he seemed cursed. But then he shared his songs with us, which were his salvation and our blessing. He sang Our Father in his native language while we held hands and he prayed for us. His songs were powerful reminders that healing comes in many forms. I suppose that is why he called them his medicine. And it continues, but I think that the reader will get a really good idea of what's going on with this beautiful poem that Levi wrote.
And with my apologies to Levi Romero, I'm going to read the poem, okay? My name is Carlos Luis. Nickname is Pancho Villa. I grew up with that name since I was 8 years old. I am a Yaqui Pascua. My grandparents, they came from Nogales, Mexico side. But they grew up over there in Grand Stone, Old Pascua. Now this song is the Lord's Prayer, and it goes like this. Yana yo, ina. Our Father who art in heaven, deliver us from the evil one. Yana yo, yana yo, Hosanna. Amen. These are the blessings of all the best songs that the Lord gave me. I don't know why he gave me these songs, but he gave them to me. and I share them with you. I sing the most powerful songs. May God bless you all, man. And it's all I can do for you, brothers. I sing the most powerful songs that I can for you. They're not witching songs, they're blessing songs. And that is Pancho Villa's prayers.
Correct.
And, you know, in reading the essays and reading all of this, it just seems that, you know, the challenge of picking from such a wide selection of poems and essays, you know, must have been proved to be challenging, but at the same time, very rewarding.
Yeah, and I cut the story short a little bit. It continues to talk about Pancho Villa, but I think what happens is there's some people that haunt you, if you will, that haunt your memory. And so there's some choices that are easy, like Pancho Villa. We knew we had to have a picture of him, and it's a beautiful picture. We knew we had to have a story about him. And Levi, I'm glad he wrote a poem about him. And there's other ones that, yeah, are difficult. Which one do we put and where do we put it? It is a challenge. And there's always something missing, if you will. I mean, if we could go back and find those missing pieces. But, you know, that's the challenge for anybody who's trying to write about culture.
As we look at the culture of Chicanos and, you know, what role does immigration play in the Chicano culture? And to add to that, the migrant farm workers, because you followed some migrant farm workers that you yourself were surprised by how early they get up to go pick chilies.
Right. Yeah. The immigration plays a big role. What some people don't understand, though, is that not all Mexican Americans are descendants of immigrants, if you will. There are many people here whose great-great-grandparents, or further than that, obviously, were here before this area became part of the U.S. But obviously, many of us as well, our parents, grandparents, great-grandparents came to this country in search of a better life, just like any other immigrant. And so that's a part of it because, you know, late 1800s, Mexican Revolution in the early 1900s, World War II, all those play a factor in Mexican migration to the U.S. And many times we welcome them. And so that relationship is a binational relationship. People need to understand that. And so it plays a big role because if you're a Mexican migrant to this country, maybe you don't consider yourself Chicano, but your children might because they inherit a different experience. And so one summer, we went to document the green chili harvest, not really knowing what to expect. So we went to Garfield, and we got there about 9 o'clock in the morning, and there were a lot of field workers, obviously, in this one field. And Garfield's a really small town, and I was wondering, well, where these people come from, and I noticed some yellow school buses lined up. And I said, you know, we're talking in Spanish, and I said, well, where do you guys come from? And they said, oh, somos de Juarez, we're from Juarez. And I was like, well, it's kind of 2 hours away from here. Do you guys leave, you know, 4 or 5 in the morning to get here? And to me, that's pretty early. And they said, no, we have to cross the International Bridge between 1 and 2 o'clock to get to the buses on time so they can drive us here and get through immigration. And that was astounding to me, to think that people are getting up, you know, 12:30, 1 o'clock in the morning to walk to the bridge, cross it, catch this yellow school bus to drive them to Garfield, Hatch, Anthony, wherever. And so we went the next week, the following week, to downtown El Paso to witness the whole process. And there it was. I mean, all these yellow buses lined up, men and women in the buses, waiting, and they don't get paid for that. They only get paid for what they pick. So once they get there, as soon as they can see their hands in front of their faces, they're there with big 5-gallon paint buckets, and they're filling up their buckets. And for each bucket, they give them a poker chip, and that poker chip is worth 80 cents. So roughly, the best workers can make about $50-something a day picking green chili, so we can put on our burgers. And then they go back and do it all over the next night.
That's truly amazing. How does border life differ from South Texas to West Texas to finally California?
You know, I don't know how different it is if we look at time statically, but when we'd go across the border and then we'd go back to those places a year later or 2 years later, you would notice how things had changed, either dealing with the building of the fences and how that affected the communities, or looking at the spark in violence in certain places and how that destroyed communities. And so, for example, some of our earlier trips, we'd go to Juarez, and you know, people are still going to the market, and it's still, you know, very friendly. And then we go back, and you know, it's more questions of what do you know, be careful and things of that nature. And then we went to south of San Diego and looking at Tijuana. We're looking at the border fence, which is essentially goes through the ocean. And the Tijuana side is having a party. They're at the beach and they act like they're at the beach. They're having a good time. And the U.S. side, because of the Borderfield Park, the immigration is coming down with ATVs and trucks. So it's not fun to be at that beach because they're constantly in your face, if you will, and chasing people back. And so I guess it kind of depends on the places geographically, not so much. Maybe it's the time of the year and how the violence and how the border fence and how that stress changes the sense of people, because I think the people just, they want to live like anywhere else. They want to be happy, but those things really change their lives a lot.
What comes next as you look forward to exploring the culture and again teaching people about the culture? What projects do you see as far as where the Chicano culture will be with assimilation, say 20 years from now?
Wow. I think with this immigration thing going on.
And the thing is, I ask you such a big question when we have less than a minute to go, but I think that it just seems that there's so much to explore with this book and the culture itself.
I think one of the things we try to document was that despite fences, that culture can't really be stopped. It's going to continue to flow. And so my hope is that when I see kids speaking Spanish on the street, when I see families together, that really what's going to happen is that people are more proud of their culture and their background, who they are. And so this book, another book 10, 15 years would be a different book.
Professor Herrera, thank you very much. We could talk on for a long time. The book is called Sagrado, a Photopoetics across the Chicano homeland. Thank you for watching Fronteras, a Changing America.